The game begins with Magnus Carlsen advancing his pawn to d4, a quiet step that is heavy with intention. His opponent answers with knight to f6. Already, the board whispers territory and belonging of two sides staking their claim to the same homeland. The knight climbs to c3, steady as a promise, and the bishop breathes from d7, a watcher in the dark. After that, white plants his presence in the center as though laying roots in contested soils. Thus, the king's Indian defense is born, a landscape where memory and ambition collide, where every square becomes a question of belonging. Black answers with d6, white's bishop settles on e2, then comes e5, black striking at the center like a heartbeat against the silence. At this point in the game, it is a rule of thumb not to rush to take. So Magnus Carlsen leaves the tension on the board and castles. Then after the knight approaches, its shadow growing heavier upon the center. Then, with one push, he drives it away. And now, b4. The pawn advances like a blade cutting into the flank. This is the bayonet attack. Sharp, relentless, and a line that carves open the future of the battle. The idea behind the bayonet attack for white against the king's Indian defense is simple. White is always planning to strike on the queen side, seeking to carve a path before black can gather their storm on the king side. It is the race of two fires. Whoever lights the sky first may claim the knight. Now, Sina bends the knight to h5, a relentless figure on the edge of the board. The piece carries two dreams on that position, perhaps to surge forward with f5 or to leap into f4. It waits like a question with two answers, each one promising its own storm. The most interesting thing about this move is that it is very similar to this YouTube channel because it also carries two dreams. One is to tell the story of chess and the other is to share it with you. So please smash that button and get us to 2K. Thank you. In response to this, Magnus Carlsen lifts his rook to e1, a move so quiet it seems to vanish into the board. Yet, in its silence lies depth. It opens a retreat for the bishop to f1, so when the knight jumps in, there will be an escape square. Sina thrusts the pawn to f5, a hammer upon the door. At first glance, it seems black is pounding with force. The board trembles as though a storm has arrived at the gate, but Magnus turns away, as if deaf to the pounding. It feels almost mad that he can push a pawn on the far edge of the board, refusing the demands of black's assault. Yet, there is fate in his defiance, for in the future, these quiet pawns will match and on the opposite wing, they will break open the horizon. Sina plays h6, seeking more support, showing up the fire behind his pawn attack. Now, Magnus plays rook to a3. The move looks absurd, yet it serves two quiet purposes. It escapes the diagonal and it shields the knight at the same time. Then Sina thrusts forward with g5 and Magnus drives the knight from his ground. But Sina does not retreat. The knight is left to die. With pawn takes on e4, he unseals the line for the knight, bishop, and the rook. That knight becomes a willing martyr, a Trojan horse at the gates, failing so the future may rise. Sina offers his knight and Magnus answers in kind, sacrificing his own before striking back to claim the fallen piece. One sacrifice calls to another, and the board replies in echoes of loss and balance. We arrive at this strange pause, where for a heartbeat it seems black's attack has vanished. Magnus has built a blockage, a wall against the storm. Yet, beneath the silence, something wild is gathering. What comes next will break the stillness. Sina continues the game by shifting the knight to d6, and Magnus Carlsen replies with queen to h5, a natural step, pressing the knight and drawing his queen nearer like a shadow closing in. Sina moves his knight to h4, placing it on the edge like a blade waiting to strike. With the queen standing close, Magnus longs for another piece to join the attack, for the queen cannot fight alone. In this position, there are lots of options. A tempting one is knight to g5, threatening mate and cutting the queen's defense of the knight. But rook to f5 would break the dream in that position. King to h1 is another plan, with the idea of bringing the rook to g1. But that also asks for too much because you are going to need to make a lot of moves before the rook swings to the open file. Another option is bishop to h3. This is a move that feels natural, but what Magnus will get in that position is only a trade. And for someone like Magnus, going for the bare minimum isn't it. The one idea that Magnus would love to bring him closer to mate is to lift the rook straight to the h file, but that square is sealed and it is guarded by the bishop. Although the idea is great, it is really impossible to bring the rook to that file because the bishop is not impotent and would obviously take it, and in a game of chess, you do not want to lose your rook in a moment where you are about to strangle your opponent's king. So what does Magnus Carlsen do to continue the attack? It seems all the options available on the board fall short to one tactic or the other, and it was at this point Magnus Carlsen plays the impossible move, rook to h3 anyway. He gives the rook away because he realizes that once the rook is given away, the bishop will cut across the board with unstoppable force, especially on e6. On this square, the bishop is no longer a bishop anymore, but a spear aimed straight at the king. Sina, in response, answers with a rook sacrifice, throwing wood on the fire to shield his king. But Magnus Carlsen refuses the bait. The last thing Magnus will do is do exactly what his opponent wants him to do. Not even a free rook is tempting enough, so he plays bishop to e6 check. The king shifts and Magnus answers with king to h1, cleaning the stage, preparing to call a second rook into the assault. Sina strikes back, bringing his rook to contest the foul. The rooks are traded, and for a moment, the battleground seems to settle. Balance restored, the game returning to equal ground. But Sina still needs to be careful because in this position, a single slip hides mate in one. He sees this and places his queen on e8 to guard the threat. But in sealing that door, he leaves the knight unprotected and Magnus Carlsen claims it without mercy. A check drives Magnus Carlsen's king aside, and in that, Magnus Carlsen's knight is lost to queen takes on e4 and the balance of sacrifice deepens. Magnus continues the game with queen to h5, threatens mate in one in a single stroke. Now, every move from Sina must carry check or the game is lost. The king's life now hangs only on the queen's power to deliver check, just like our channel's life hangs only on your power to subscribe. Please, with one click, you will give us another breath of survival for the next game we will tell. So please smash that button if you haven't to get us to 2K. Thank you. He begins with queen to h1, the first check upon the king. Then comes the second, the third, the fourth. Will it ever end? It seems endless, yet the bishop steps in to block, only for another check to fall along the first rank. The king flees, desperate for shelter. A sixth check descends, then a seventh as Sina snatches a pawn to keep the chase alive. But at last, the river of checks runs dry. With no more lifeline, Sina lowers his hands and resigns because Magnus Carlsen would surely, in the next move, mate him in one move.
If you enjoyed this video, I'm 100% sure you are going to enjoy this one on your screen as well. Please engage. Bye.